And thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our special presentation, Saving Biscayne Bay. We hope you found it educational, but most of all, we hope you found it inspirational. Because despite all the challenges that Biscayne Bay is facing, as you just heard from our experts, we must and can do a lot to turn this around and save Biscayne Bay. We are all part of this solution, and it's so important that we are all part of this conversation and keep this narrative alive. That's why we're here right now, to continue this conversation. I know a lot of you have many, many questions. We have assembled for you an esteemed panel of experts from FIU's Institute of the Environment, Dr. Todd Krall, Executive Director of the FIU Institute of the Environment, Dr. Piero Gardinali, Associate Director of the FIU Institute of the Environment, Dr. James Forkland, Director of Oceans and Coastlines Division, FIU Institute of the Environment, Dr. Ligia Collado Vives, Senior Lecturer and Interim Associate Chair of the FIU Department of Biological Sciences, Dr. Tom Frankovich, Research Assistant Professor at the FIU Institute of the Environment, and Dr. Tiffany Troxler, Director of Science for Sea Level Solutions at FIU's Institute of the Environment, and very important, a member of the Biscayne Bay Task Force, which we just finally heard from this week. I commend you all for your incredible, incredible work. A lot of questions to get to. Todd, I want to begin with you with the questions that I probably bug you with every single day. Your big mistake was giving me your cell phone number, but can you fill us in and bring us up to date? How is Biscayne Bay doing today?
Yeah, so as you know, we've deployed 2 buoys that basically take data points every 15 minutes. And I watch it constantly, and I've got it up in front of me on my other computer screen right now. Oxygen levels are good, algae levels are low, temperature is still pretty warm, but you know, right now we're in a good place. But this, you know how fragile this good place is.
I know that, as we said in the special, this was a low oxygen event. I want you to pick up Dr. Gardinali with where we left off there. The 2 points that we signaled out in the special, that being the Biscayne Canal and the Little River Canal. How are those areas doing today? Is the oxygen level there still dangerously low, or has that bounced back? Piero, that's to you.
Yeah, the oxygen in those 2 canals, you know, varies a lot because you do have fresh water coming up, and when you mix fresh water and salt water, you know, they don't really mix right away. So you often see a lens of fresh water coming in on them, but the bottom of the canal is usually deprived of oxygen. So we do have a problem that is chronic in those 2 canals that we really need to address. You know,
the amount of pollution that we saw in those 2 outflows, obviously that contributes to that problem, does it not?
Yeah, I would say that those 2 canals are affected by humans, you know, if you want to call it humans. More than anything else. So, you know, they could act as a potential source of water coming into the bay. And both of them do have a long history of pollution themselves. Yeah. So they are 2 places that we really have to focus on looking at it.
I think the images that we shared with our viewers and with all of you kind of speak for themselves. It's kind of heartbreaking to see that that's what it's come to. But, you know, we just heard from water management that they are on it and they're going to fix it. And so we trust that they will follow through. Dr. Forkland, it is no accident that this fish kill and algae happened in the northern section of our bay. The Tuttle Basin, that's what it's called, has lost 80% of its seagrass. Talk us through why that was also a factor in what we just saw. Obviously, this was a perfect storm of higher than normal water temperatures and no circulation, high salinity. But why did this fish kill happen there, and why was it no surprise that it happened there? Was this just a ticking time bomb?
Yeah, Louis, you did an excellent job on your piece. Let me commend you on that on behalf of all of us. So Northern Biscayne Bay its circulation has been highly altered. There's no more flow to the south because of the causeways and the dredge and fill islands. And the northern part of the bay has also been receiving polluted water in canals and in groundwater for quite a long time with a lot of phosphorus in it. And that phosphorus builds up biomass. You know, if you fertilize plants in your yard, you get more plant. That's what's going on in Biscayne Bay. We're fertilizing it with phosphorus. We're getting more plants, more biomass. And at night, all of that biomass, not just the seagrasses, but especially the algae and the microalgae, suck down all of the oxygen and they drive it anoxic at night. So in the northern part of the bay, we've built up biomass of weedy plants and bacteria, and at night, especially warm nights when very little oxygen can be stored in the water, they use it all up and it goes anoxic, and then the fish die.
Given the fact that, and this is a follow-up for you as well, Jim, given the fact that we have lost 80% of our seagrass there, is this going to be a recurring event? Is this a thing now, whenever the water temperatures get as high as they were back in August, that fish kill could possibly happen again?
It certainly could. And another problem with losing a seagrass is that seagrasses hold down all of that fine mud that's on the bottom of Biscayne Bay. And when you kill the seagrass, then it doesn't take much to stir that mud and the nutrients in that mud back up into the water column, which just exacerbate the problem. So it's going to take a while for us to get seagrasses reestablished so that they can hold down that bottom and the water can become clear again.
Tom, I want to get to you because you were one of the first phone calls that I made after the algae bloom began, and there was obviously a lot of concern that some of those blooms could be toxic. We didn't think they were at the very beginning, and the initial reports that we got were inconclusive for any toxicity. But has there been any more research done on that, and has your opinion of those blooms changed at all?
Yeah, well, we did not see any toxic algae species. The bloom was comprised of Chaetoceros species, which is very spiny, and it can cause problems, but the problems that Chaetoceros usually causes are in areas where you have aquaculture, where fish can't swim out of the way of that algae, and these long spines on these Chaetoceros can hurt them. These Chaetoceros species produce spores, and these spores are like seeds. And after they bloom, those spores go into the sediment, and they're there to resprout again when conditions are favorable. So it is likely that that area is going to experience more algal blooms from Chaetoceros in the future.
And this is something, I've lived in Miami all my life. I'm a local boy. I cut my teeth on those waters. I think I learned to water ski on those waters and fish and drive a boat. It's personal for me. It's personal to many people who grew up here in South Florida and call South Florida home. I have never, ever seen that in my entire life. Ligia, I want to ask you, how unusual was that algae bloom that we saw, and had that ever happened before to that extent?
So you're asking me, essentially, we have several algal blooms and microalgal blooms in 2013, in 2010. So this is a recurrent event, but I think that in this time we're looking at different things happening at the same time. And this is a signal that things are getting worse and that the system is having less capability to respond to whatever stressor we're going to be putting. So that makes the system really vulnerable. And as Tom was saying, we have the seeds, we have the cyst or any of those Chaetoceros, once you have the conditions, this is going to happen, and this was happening. And, we have been also looking at macro algae blooms in the bottom. So we get scared when we see things floating, but there are many things happening in the bottom. As Jim was saying, we're losing the seagrasses, but we are also preempting them with macroalgal blooms. So the restoration is really needed. We really need to be looking in the bottom as well as in the surface.
Well, from what I understand the science to be, we can't even begin to talk about restoring the seagrass until we eliminate the pollutants that are continuing to flow into Biscayne Bay. And that's one of the things that the Biscayne Bay Task Force actually reported on. They finally released their study to the Miami-Dade County Commission last Monday. Tiffany, you were on that board. There were over 60 recommendations that were presented to the Miami-Dade Commission. We can't go over all 60, we don't have the time for that, but what in your opinion is the most pressing, something that the Miami-Dade Commission can adopt immediately and put into effect that could alleviate some of the things that we're seeing right now on Biscayne Bay?
Yeah, thank you, Louis, and I also want to commend you on your piece. Great work. Yeah, so the task force report was heard by the commission on Monday, and in fact, in that commission meeting, they accepted the recommendations and also put forward a resolution for a chief bay officer. And that was one of the overarching recommendations of the task force, to have an individual that could spend all of their time working on assisting a watershed management board to do the coordination, to do to be able to follow the monitoring of the issues, report that to the commission, and just keep on top of this. I mean, it's a situation that it's going to take deliberate, coordinated, and sustained effort over many years, and it's really going to take someone and some staff a significant effort in order to get to where we need to be. And in terms of some of those, additional immediate actions, as I mentioned, the Chief Bay Officer will really help to get things kick-started to convene a watershed management board. And so this was a governance structure that we were inspired by the Tampa Bay National Estuary Program model, so that there is a governance structure in place that has the technical experts, that has the community engaged, and to implement a watershed restoration plan that's based on some of the recommendations that were presented in the report.
It's based on science.
Yeah.
A lot of people have expressed their frustration with the amount of studying that has been done. I mean, we've been studying this for over 10 years. The alarm bells have been going off. We saw the impassioned plea before the county commission of the fisherman Kipnis, who went before the board in 2017, just saying we need help. The seagrass is dying. There are no more fish. Is this the creation of this Chief Bay Officer and Water Management Board? Is that just another study? Is this just going to delay the process? Is this going to delay the action, or will this actually expedite action, Tiffany?
Yeah. So the part of the rationale for the Watershed Management Board, it's comprised of agencies, organizations, and municipalities that have funding to put down for the projects that need to happen. But at the same time, there are a number of things that the county commission can push forward as a county commission. And in fact, I believe Higgins and Cava have a resolution that's being proposed for a fertilizer ordinance, which was one of the recommendations that was put forward. I'm hearing municipalities. We were on Scott Galvin put together a webinar earlier today, talking to residents, saying if you need help with converting your septic to sewer, we can help to identify the funds for the connections. So it really is, as you'd mentioned, as Dr. Krall had mentioned, and in your piece, is that it really is going to be a significant collective effort that's necessary, and we need to find pots of money and advocates from individual residents up to, federal agencies, so that we can implement a collective effort and get those deep reductions in nutrient loading. And those, the sources are many, as you covered in your piece, and we need to draw down the pollutant loads from each of those sources all at the same time, and need to do it urgently.
That is clear. Jim, we're looking at the Tampa Bay model as a study. It took 20 years before they were able to see any difference in the seagrass coming back. And they only they had a nitrogen problem in Tampa Bay. We have a phosphorus problem here in Miami-Dade County, but they only reduced their nitrogen load by 57%. So it's not like we have to wipe out all of it to begin to replant the seagrass. Is that correct?
That's true, but nitrogen is actually an easier problem to solve than phosphorus, as we spoke about, Louis, because nitrogen is cycled by bacteria, and the bacteria turn it back into the nitrogen gas that makes up most of our atmosphere and take it out of the bay. But unfortunately, phosphorus doesn't have a system like that. You put phosphorus in our system and it sticks. So we've been putting a slow trickle of phosphorus into the system for a long time, and it's not leaving the system, it's just building up within it. So here, we're going to need to be aggressive about reducing phosphorus. It's not just good enough to get phosphorus concentrations and loadings lower. We need to cut down the total mass of phosphorus that's going into the system, because every phosphorus molecule that goes in is responsible for an increase in biomass in the bay and sticks in the bay. So we have to be really aggressive if we expect to be able to turn the tide, slow down the phosphorus pollution, and get our water quality back.
And this has to happen almost statewide because this intricate system of canals that I described in the piece, they flow all the way to Lake Okeechobee. And we all know about the pesticide situation over there. We have a question from one of our viewers. This is directed to you, Dr. Gardinali. Have they improved the flow of pesticides coming out of Lake Okeechobee to your knowledge?
Well, not to my knowledge, but again, you know, the pesticides are just one side of the story, and they are related to the nutrients too. So if I have to choose one of the evils that I have to deal with first, I will go with the nutrients first. You know, the pesticides are an issue, but again, every molecule of phosphorus that comes in needs to be dealt with. And there are regulations for both of them. We do have good technologies to treat water for phosphorus, not in septics though. So, I mean, there's a compromise there, but I will agree that phosphorus is probably our #1 problem right now.
And how urgent is the conversion then from septic tanks to sewer lines? I mean, isn't go ahead.
I would say we're 10 years behind.
We're 10 years behind. And oh, I went dark, but that's okay. We're 10 years behind. 10 years behind. And it's a $3.3 billion project when this actually happens. So we will need state and federal funding, but you know, Monroe County, they made that happen. And if Monroe County can make it happen, then we can make it happen here in Miami-Dade. I have a question for Dr. Frankovich and Dr. Goyalovides. This is obviously a resident who lives by the water who was very distressed to see the algae bloom. What can we do to limit algae blooms, and will they come and flow with the water temperatures, or anything that we can do to prevent them from actually happening again?
Leah, you want to take that first?
Okay, Tom, thank
I'm
you.
going to turn on the light real quick.
Well, I think that this is absolutely correlated with everything that we have been saying, and these microalgal blooms are responding to the increasing nutrients. So there is no alternative other than decreasing the nutrients. So this is something that we will need to learn how to live with until we really decrease those. And as Tom was saying, we have the basic cysts that are going to be just waiting for the right conditions. And we cannot, we cannot expect that the temperature is going to change either. So we are in a way needing to support from the local perspective, decreasing nutrients at all costs to stop the algal blooms, but we will have to deal with them until we really have some years of control. Tom?
Tom, do you want to add to that?
I agree. There's nothing that can be done immediately for short-term solutions. It's a long-term process. We're going to be dealing with blooms for quite a while yet.
You know, Todd, I want to go back to a conversation you and I had at the very beginning, and you were almost berating yourself saying, I should have been on top of this. The warning signs were there. We now have the equipment in place where we can monitor the bay and know if and when the conditions are ripe for another fish kill. Is that the plan moving forward? Will there be closer monitoring of the bay? And will we be able to prevent another fish kill from happening again if we are on top of it and we are monitoring the bay?
Well, there's two answers there. The short-term answer is yes, we're going to be on top of better monitoring. And unfortunately, predicting a fish kill is not a happy prognosis to have to make, right? But what we really need to do, and what we're going to do right away, is start measuring phosphorus levels coming into the bay. We have now isolated the 6 places where they could be coming in. You accurately pointed out, we're very suspicious of the Little River. We're very suspicious about Biscayne Canal. We are going to develop phosphorus sensors, which are not trivial to have to measure phosphorus in salt water. Develop phosphorus sensors with a colleague from New Hampshire, and basically be measuring the incoming phosphorus. Now that'll do 2 things. Number 1, when we get to certain critical levels of phosphorus, we'll know that we've reached a point where the algal blooms, those spores, those algal seeds that Tom and Lee were talking about are going to take off. But more important than that, we need to identify where the biggest problem areas are in order of risk. And we need to get our county policymakers to act on those places. We need to be their eyes with hard science about where they're going to invest the first 100 million, billion, whatever it is to convert septic systems. That has to be our goal, and it has to happen, as Piero said, 10 years ago. We can't go back in time, so we have to make that happen really quickly. I'll make one last point before you go somewhere else. Again, you and I have been talking about this a lot. Sadly, it takes a catastrophe, something this heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching, to bring the community together. There are about 15 different agencies and entities that have been monitoring the bay through this as well as other times. For the first time ever, we have a coordinated call every so often, and we're placing all of our sampling points in coordination so that we're getting full coverage of the bay from a scientific perspective. As far as I can tell, that's never happened before. Everybody has sort of just done their own thing. And this group has asked our FIU, probably some graduate students, to pull together all of the data from everyone who was active during this event over the last couple of weeks and put together a scientific report that clearly spells out what happened, what the data were, and what the signs were that pointed to all this, so that nobody can argue anymore about what this is. I don't know if you heard the county commissioners meeting the other day, but the mayor kept saying, but the South Bay is fine, it's healthy, it's nice. And he just kept pointing away from the north. You know, this is one bay, it's one connected bay. And so it's on us to get that information out there, digestible and usable for the community. And that's why
I want to defer to you. Please break this down for us. This is a very important point. This is one bay. You can't just dissect the bay like that. And we spoke about this in the special, that we see the loss of seagrass migrating south. So talk to me about how the whole bay, even though the major loss of seagrass is in the north, the entire bay is impacted by this, correct? Jim.
Yes, the entire bay is impacted. Louis, I live in the South Bay, and so our groundwater is polluted, largely by septic tanks and over-fertilization. That groundwater and the canal water basically are the same thing. They interchange, and they run out, and they have the greatest impact close to where they run out. And so all along the shoreline, all the way down the South Bay, you find algae blooms and loss of seagrass. And you know, where I live right now, it's only about 100 yards offshore before you get to some really nice seagrass. But that first 100 yards offshore is bad. So it's one bay. This progressive phosphorus fertilization is buildup worse in the north, but that buildup is heading to the south, and it's heading from the west coast of the bay, from the shoreline out as well. So it's one system, and boy, I hope we can get this turned around and get the seagrass invading the bay in the next couple of decades.
So it's not just a question of circulation. That was one of the hypotheses that was being floated around, that because the north has been so dissected with the causeways and the artificial canals, and we've interrupted the natural flow of seawater into that section of the bay. That's not the issue. I mean, obviously that would alleviate the problem if we somehow, with the Army Corps of Engineers, civil engineers, find a way to actually add more ocean flow to that part of the bay, but that's not the problem. The problem is way bigger than that.
It's not the complete problem. Right. It's part of the problem.
It is part of the problem. And something that I want to bring up, that scene that you saw in the special, I had asked Jim because we were supposed to actually go out on the boat and actually shoot some real seagrass for the special, but because of the pandemic, we weren't able to do that. And so we were at a loss for seagrass video to bring that part of the story to life. And we were with Jim. I said, Jim, can you take us to a place near you where there is live seagrass? He said, yes, come with me. It's only 5 minutes away. We took a 5-minute drive from your house, and you were fully expecting to see live seagrass because you were just there 8 months prior. And when we got there, the seagrass that you wanted to show us that was alive and thriving was dead. And that was just 8 months ago.
Yep. It's true. There was a scum of algae coating the bottom and a scum of algae on the few remaining seagrasses that were left there. And that's new.
And Tom, does that algae, does that not prevent the seagrass from giving it the possibility of coming back? If you have algae in that body of water, doesn't that kind of like smother that body of water so no oxygen, no sunlight can get through?
Yeah, it blocks a lot of light. And it also, it sucks up a lot of the nutrients and builds higher accumulations. First you would have a little bit of accumulation of these epiphytes on the grass. When things get worse, actually those algae that are on the grass can't even compete against the stuff in the water column. So the plankton and the Chaetoceros, stuff like that, was when things get really bad. So it'll progress from when things degrade, they progress from a clear water column with a seagrass dominated system to seagrass with a coating of algae, and eventually to a thing where even the epiphytic algae and the seagrass can't survive, and you just have phytoplankton.
We have some questions here from our residents in Broward and the Keys, and there's several questions. They're asking, is this just a Miami-Dade problem, or can we see this event migrating north to Broward or even down south to the Florida Bay and the Florida Keys? Anyone want to take that title? I'll give that to you.
Jim is really our Florida Bay expert, so I'll pass it on to him. But I do believe this is a bigger problem. In fact, we're working with scientists from FAU right now to start looking at the New River, just like the Miami River, and understand what they're going to be facing and what they are likely facing. So, I think it is a widespread problem. But Jim, you want to talk about Florida Bay?
Sure, and Florida Bay and the Keys. So in the last decade, the recognition that septic tanks were polluting groundwater and groundwater was affecting nearshore surface water quality really hit home in Monroe County. And Monroe County, in partnership with the federal government and state government and homeowners, spent about $2 billion to get people off septic, to collect sewage and treat it and dispose of it centrally. So Monroe is taking care of Monroe County's problems. And we hope to see a lot of positive impacts from this big effort very soon. Monroe doesn't really have to worry at this point about the Miami problem. That's decades down the line. But if Miami continues to add phosphorus and eutrophy or over-fertilize Biscayne Bay, so this moves to the south, eventually it will break through into the Monroe County line. But at this rate, we're probably still decades from that, so there's plenty of time to act.
Tiffany, the lack of urgency is certainly not lost on me, and I read the very dire words from your report. This is an urgent and final call to finally address the problems of Biscayne Bay. Is there, in your opinion, the political will to move this forward and to act urgently on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there was concern that this report would end up on the shelf, like many reports focusing on Biscayne Bay in the past. And this event has really drawn a lot of attention to the importance of implementing those recommendations. So as unfortunate and as this event has been, it is drawn the urgent action and attention that's required.
So we all know that bringing Biscayne Bay back, the seagrass is key to that happening. I have a question here. Jim, is this to you? We kind of touched on this, but kind of break it down one more time. Is it possible to replant seagrasses?
If you fix the water quality first, so enough light is reaching the bottom and the algae growth rates are low enough, yes, there are places where seagrasses have been transplanted very successfully. But unfortunately, the history of seagrass transplanting, if you look back, there's people planting grass before they solve the problem. So let's solve the water quality, the phosphorus problem first, and then we can speed up that invasion that I hope for of seagrasses back into the bay by transplanting.
Yeah, and we saw the model at Tampa Bay. It took 20 years for them to see a difference, but they attacked this aggressively. If three counties can come together and come to a consensus to attack this problem and work together, then I think, we should be able to do that here in Miami-Dade County. And as you mentioned, Todd, this call now where you have all municipalities on board acting together as one body, I think is a positive sign in that direction. Is there any indication, this is a question from a viewer, Todd, I'll ask you, how long this will take? I know they're asking you to look into your ecological crystal ball, but can you give us a ballpark? How long will this take?
There are towns like, I think, Coconut Grove, Coral Gables is maybe 2/3 of the way of converting all the septic tanks into sewer pipelines. I think we've been working on that for about 5 or 6 years. unless you plow an awful lot of money and a lot of education into the homeowners and the communities right away, it takes time. I mean, people, you know, it's a lot to tear up the roads and put new pipes and all of that stuff. A lot of these places don't actually have a central sewage system at all. I live in North Coral Gables. We do not have a pipe to connect to. So, you know, it would take a massive amount of construction, but it can be done, and it can be done quickly if the funds are made available and the political will is there. But I think we should never forget about that we need to talk to the residents and the folks and explain to them why this is so vitally important and why it's worth whatever trouble they're going to have to go through. And I'll just say one more thing, Louis. Miami Waterkeepers and us, Candace Alouche, is one of our communication people in the Institute. We're right now putting together some best practices for individual homeowners that live near waterfronts and canals. And we'll be holding town hall meetings and passing those out widely so that the residents, like the folks that you introduced me to, Louis, on the San Souci Canal, we're going to contact those folks. We're going to get these pamphlets to them and let them disseminate them to people so that they know that even when they mow their grass, they shouldn't just dump the grass into the canal, right? I mean, none of that stuff should get into the canal. It all carries phosphorus.
Education is so important. And how much is community involvement play into the equation of restoring Biscayne Bay? We saw the young kids, I mean, the youth, God bless them. And I've been hanging out with these kids for years, and they're out there every weekend, picking up trash, doing their part, cleaning up mangroves, knowing that plastic is a big contributor to what we're seeing happening, not just to our bay, but to our oceans. I really have so much respect for these young people who know that it's their future and are fighting every day to protect it. But give me the larger picture here. How important, and I mentioned this also at the end of the special, that the entire community join together and join this mission and get on board. And education is a key component of this. Who wants to take that? Tiffany, I'll go to you.
Yeah, Tiffany, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when the community comes together, there's nothing that we can't do. And there is, you know, there are things that every individual can contribute to, just like the kids that you've become close with, Louis. You know, Todd mentioned about grass clippings. I mean, it's really just as simple as talking to your, you know, the company that manages your landscape. You know, tell them you don't want fertilizers in your yard, or you want them applied sparingly, or you'd like those grass clippings blown back into your yard rather into the street. You know, find out, maybe you're not sure you have a septic tank. Maybe you don't realize that it hasn't been maintained in a long time. Maybe you're not exactly sure how much fertilizer you should apply. You know, these are all really important things that, as Todd mentioned in the video, that, you know, each of those individual parcels add up to a lot of pollutants that can get into our bay.
And that's something that the county can roll out almost immediately, an education campaign, PSA, something that will educate the public as to how they can be better stewards of the environment. There's a lot of questions here about boating, a lot. Pierre, I'm gonna take this to you. Does the amount of pollution coming from boats exacerbate the problem, and should we limit boating to Biscayne Bay to limit the amount of pressure on the bay right now? That's not going to be a popular answer, so I'm going to give that to you. You be the bad guy.
So I'm going to start saying that I love Biscayne Bay. This month I managed to swim 30 miles within this bay, so I don't blame boaters. I think the overall answer that we all need to look at is reduce. We all need to reduce our footprint to the bay. One way or another one, you could do that. If you're a boater, I mean, throwing things, you know, on the side of the boat is never good. Okay, just going to the beach and expect that, you know, the things that you bring, somebody will pick up the trash for you. That's just not good. So it's not only about nutrients and all that. You know, we just need to be good users of the bay itself. So if I have to point to something, would be reduce. Just, you know, reduce your footprint, try to leave anything behind because it wasn't there to start with.
Yeah, we can all be a little bit more conscious in our everyday choices. I agree with that 100%. Right now, there's just not the will or the power to enact some kind of single-use plastic ban. I hope in my lifetime that will happen, but that's a hard hill to climb up. But all of us in our own choices that we make every day can make a choice every day not to buy plastic or to limit our use of plastics to only those that are recyclable, and make choices, make better choices every day. A lot of questions here about the algae bloom that we saw on the West Coast and the algae blooms that we saw in the Fort Lauderdale Intercoastal a couple of years back. That was a blue-green algae, and then we had the red tide on the West Coast. I don't remember in my lifetime ever experiencing red tide here in Biscayne Bay or on the Atlantic side of Florida. Is that something that's now a possibility given the vulnerability of Biscayne Bay? Is that something that could happen? Could we see a red tide or a blue-green algae bloom like we saw in Fort Lauderdale? I'll start with either one of my beautiful algae experts can take this. Who wants to go first?
Go, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay. We can experience different types of blooms. The blue-green algae bloom is certainly a possibility. Those originate from freshwater sources. As for the red tide that I experienced on the West Coast, that is highly unlikely. That organism is an offshore organism. And when we have it here on the East Coast is when it slips around the Keys and then gets into the Gulf Stream and comes up this way. So I think that's less of a concern, but there are blooms that occur in Indian River Lagoon, other species, some of them toxic that, that certainly can occur. There's a dinoflagellate pyridinium, that's a possibility. There's they call it a rhapidophyte, Chatanella, which also occurs, which is also is toxic. And those can occur. And part of what makes northern Biscayne Bay sort of like susceptible to these blooms is its geography and its lack of circulation. So longer residence time is a factor which sets these areas up for a bloom when they experience more nutrients.
Leah, you want to add something to that?
Well, yes, I think this is referring to the and all of these red algal, microalgal blooms. What I would like to add now, now that I have the chance to talk, is that we have the whole bay, and there are many signs that we can also follow. So we have corals, and corals have been suffering a lot as well. So I think the education that you are doing, Louis, is amazing, is wonderful, and we need to be very attentive to everything that is just happening now. But it's happening through different scales of time. Coral reefs have been suffering for a while already. And then the same way that we are having the nutrients, and I think that is the most important thing that we need to address locally, that we can do a lot of work locally, all of the community. We also are going to be having some other external events such as Sargassum, and some of the accumulations that we were having in the west side by Dearden Estate and all of that area, massive amount and accumulation and decomposition of organic matter that is just suffocating the seagrass. So we are being attacked by different areas. And I think that needs to be taken in consideration as well.
Yeah, that's certainly something that is being discussed. I mean, we are seeing increasing amounts of sargassum on the shore. It seems like every year it gets worse and worse and worse. And yeah, that sargassum just decomposes and that causes bacteria. As a matter of fact, there's some scientists that believe that is one of the contributing factors to the enterococci bacteria that keep showing up whenever we sample waters on the beach. So it's not just fecal bacteria, but it could also be that the decaying sargassum that is also causing those spikes in bacteria in our waters. Obviously, that's also compounding the problems that Bay is facing right now. Is that now another wrinkle in this very complicated equation? Todd, I'll take this to you. And is that something that we now have to also, handle, the sargassum coming into the bay? It usually stays on the coast. And that was my interpretation of this. But does the sargassum actually impact the bay?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it comes in the volumes that we saw, was it last year or the year before, and we can look to places like Puerto Rico and Mexico, when it comes in high amounts, once again, that's an organic form of phosphorus coming in with those plants. But the big issue is when they come in and then settle in the bay and on the shoreline, as Leahy has said, they decompose. The microbes suck up the oxygen, and that's just yet another tax on the already sometimes low oxygen level. So yeah, this stuff is hitting us from every which way. And so we need to be attentive. And I know there are places, I sent Leahy a picture when I was in Puerto Rico last. They have a little thing that goes along and rakes up the sargassum every morning along the coastlines to make sure that it doesn't accumulate and suck up all the coastal ocean.
I see that happen in my backyard, Miami Beach, with sargassum, loads of it appearing on the shore one day and the next day it's gone. So I know that the Miami Beach, the city of Miami Beach is on top of that. I hope that the other municipalities on the coast are being just as aggressive. What about a hurricane? Talk to me about the impact a hurricane could have, positive or negative. Who wants to take that?
Well, no one starts. I'll start. You know, hurricanes are a mixed bag. Hurricanes can cause a tremendous amount of damage in one place and basically leave other areas 5 miles away from them untouched. So every hurricane is different. It's possible that a big hurricane flush with a bunch of rain could actually wash that nutrient or wash the plankton blooms out of the north part of the bay. That's a possibility. But if it came from a slightly different angle, it could actually stir up the bottom and make those plankton blooms worse. I don't think any of us that live here in South Florida want to wish a hurricane on Miami and Biscayne Bay. And there are going to be some that'll be good for the bay and some that'll be bad for it.
Louis, you remember we were standing on the causeway Saturday morning, and at that time we still thought we were going to get whacked pretty directly on that Monday. But you and I were looking, and we noticed that in just the day or two before when we were out on the water was just flat. You know, it was just sitting there, and we were looking at those white caps moving from the east to the west. And I said, man, that might be the best thing that could happen is the hurricane to miss us, but bring enough wind to just sort of whip up the water a little bit. And I really do think that windy condition helped. Yeah, what we saw that Saturday morning, I think, was the beginning of some wind and stirring up and some oxygenation.
You have a great question here. I don't know who wants to take this. You Piero, Tiffany, or Jim. Is the full restoration of Biscayne Bay possible without the completion of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan? Everything is connected. Obviously, we talked about this in the special too, how the Everglades was really the original source of fresh water in the Biscayne Bay. We have completely, messed that up. So does that hinge on the does the restoration of Biscayne Bay hinge on the restoration of the Everglades?
I'm going to take a first jab at that. It cannot hurt. Okay, there's certainly a lot of aspects of the Everglades restoration that will benefit Biscayne Bay in every way, shape, or form. The delivery of water, the timing, the rehydration and all that. The only thing that we really need to keep an eye on is water quality. It's not only to get the quantity and the delivery right. Water quality is also something important that without that, will be far behind where we should be. Is it important? Absolutely. It's vital for the functioning of Biscayne Bay.
Mm-hmm. And Tiffany, that's number one in the Biscayne Bay Task Force report. Number one, to attack water quality, and obviously that's easier said than done. We've been talking about the different factors that have to be mitigated here, with not just our septic tanks converted to sewer lines, but also the amount of nutrients that are flowing in from our stormwater system. I mean, those canals, I'm sure that they shocked you. They shocked me when I first saw them in person. I couldn't believe that those canals actually flow water into Biscayne Bay. It was very distressing to see that in person. Let's talk about fertilizers. Big discussion that we're having about fertilizers. Are all fertilizers bad, or are organic fertilizers better, or are they all just bad?
Well, Louis, could I just make one comment about the SERP project also, to
Sure.
follow up on that last, the restoration of the Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands is part of SERP. It's part of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program. And it only focuses on the southern part of the bay, but does recognize the integrated watershed that is our Everglades landscape. So I just wanted to, bring that forward as well. But I will make a comment about the fertilizers. Yes, low release fertilizer can be a little bit better than other types of fertilizers. But it's also the application, really just how much is being applied and whether it's being applied, for example, a couple of municipalities are, and the ones you had noted in your, like City of Miami has decided to, as part of their fertilizer ordinance, they're trying to limit summertime fertilization altogether. And that's when you get a lot of runoff, and essentially those nutrients can't get into the plants fast enough, and the water is just, rushing off lawns and going into stormwater and into our canals and into the bay. So there are certain, there are certain types, but it's also a lot about the application.
I mean, putting fertilizer in the summer months, using fertilizer is just a waste of money, and you're damaging the bay. So it's a lose-lose situation. But there's an easier solution to all this. We can just use native species. If you use native species in landscaping, you don't need to use fertilizer. So there's that, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we do that? Okay. Todd, I have a question. This is to you. Was there any role played by the COVID lockdown and weeks without boats in the bay that actually reduced the pollution pressure on the bay? And is that a sign of what can happen if we do reduce our pressure on the bay?
Well, so I'll say that during the lockdown, boating use went almost to zero. And Kevin Boswell, who you've met, who's in the Institute, he does things called soundscapes. And so he measures like fish communities based on the sounds they make and stuff like that. And he said that the sound of the fish and stuff were coming back really loudly. And so more individual fishes and stuff were moving back into the bay because of less human traffic. Do I think that had anything to do with the nutrient input? I think you and I joked about this. I'm worried that people stayed at home and fertilized every individual plant in their yard. They didn't have anything to do. So and people stayed at their houses flushing their toilets 50 times a day instead of 10 times a day. So I'm not convinced it wasn't a bad thing that everybody who lives in the Bay watershed was home 24/7. So.
Okay, we're nearing the end of this. There are a lot of questions that we were not able to get to, but there are two that stand out, and people want to know what they can do. A lot of people have come up to me during these past 3 weeks asking how they can be better stewards of Biscayne Bay and what they can do in their everyday life. Who wants to just briefly touch on what the average citizen can do watching this, who is freaked out? And Todd, we talked about this in the special, how sometimes it takes fear to actually wake people up to what's really happening. But if we take a chance to just take a breath and realize that we can all be part of the solution, we can make change happen. So what is your advice? Everybody at home is freaking out watching this and feels helpless, but wants to do something.
Yeah, and again, we're going to put together some educational materials so people have some access to resources, but it really is the simple things. I mean, there's no need to just coat your lawn with fertilizer, especially not during the rainy season, because it's just going to wash away and get into the canals anyhow. If you live near the water, don't throw grass clippings, don't throw palm fronds, don't throw the coconuts in. And then I actually learned something new when we were visiting those lovely people in the San Souci Canal. One of the homeowners pointed to one of the storm drains and said, when it rains really hard, this thing completely backs up. And even though the San Souci Canal is a blind canal, that is, it's just got a wall at the far west, the water comes gushing out of that storm drain and blows all of that stuff in the surrounding area into that canal. And so we talked about the fact that this isn't a pretty job, but they ought to be working with the local municipality to put a dumpster out there. And when people see that, go rake it up and go put this stuff in a dumpster, pick up the dead fish, put them in a dumpster. I mean, we really have to think about this from the individual household all the way back, and we have to enable and empower local folks to take this one household at a time, all these little steps.
Yeah, I think education is key, and I think we have some links that we want to show you who's watching us at home or live streaming us from wherever you are. in this beautiful earth that we call home. There are some social media handles there that you can follow, and you can update yourself every day on the progress of the restoration of Biscayne Bay. And if you have more questions, there is an email address there on your screen right now where you can submit your questions to our beautiful experts at the Institute of the Environment at FIU. We'll be happy to answer them. Because again, education is key. I think one of my favorite heroes in the whole world, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, champion and defender of the Everglades, once famously said that you have to stand up for some things in this world. And I think we're all on the same page here that Biscayne Bay is worth standing up for. I want to thank you all for being a part of this conversation. I want to thank all of our experts tonight, the esteemed panel from FIU, Dr. Kroll, Dr. Gardinelli, Dr. Forkrun, Yalavidas, Dr. Frankovich, Dr. Troxler, and thank you, each and every one of you, for everything you do every single day to save our bay. We are in your debt. We have so much gratitude and love for you. A big thank you to Natalie Medina at FIU and her entire staff for putting this together and organizing this. The phone calls and the emails have been fast and furious. And this hasn't been easy as we've been trying to produce a special and put it on the air. And with that being said, I have to show some big love and gratitude to my wonderful and talented executive producer, Natalie Morea, and my brilliantly talented videographer and editor, Bill Damas, who just worked tirelessly and with so much passion and dedication and vision, who are committed to this mission. It takes a village, but I believe that we have a beautiful village that we call home here in South Florida, and together we will find the solution and find the resolve and commit to this and make this happen. This losing Biscayne Bay is just not an option. So thank you all for being a part of this. And I can't wait to bug you some more on the phone. You know I will.
Louis, on behalf of the Institute, we really want to thank you. We want to thank you for your depth of thought, for your caring. It was a wonderful piece. But you remember when we were in the middle of this, in the trenches, we made a pact to each other. And once the bay sort of got cleaned up and the temperatures went down, we're not letting this go. We're not letting this leave the radar. I look forward to at least a weekly morning call from you.
You will get it. And I look forward to you pitching me more stories. I want to keep this on the air. So I'm counting on each and every one of you. Call me, bug me, email me. I want to share your stories with our viewers. And they are very interested and very engaged into what's happening with Biscayne Bay. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.